Today is Friday, the day Ethan usually picks up the child. This is their weekly one-on-one time, and Ian usually takes him to a parent-child restaurant. It has been this way for 3 years without fail, but today Ethan abruptly told me he had a business trip and needed me to pick up Sylvie. He had found me someone who looked like his beloved woman after she gave birth to a son, and I've been the woman behind him and his son for 3 years of marriage. I've been responsible, considerate, and emotionally stable. There weren't many kids waiting for their parents at the kindergarten when I hurried there from the hospital. With a proud expression on his face, Sylvie said, "Wow, Sylvie, your necklace is so beautiful. Where did you get it?" He held his head up and said, "This was specially designed by my mom. She can make bear-shaped cookies and design necklaces. I wish she were my mom. I also want your mom. She's so gentle. My mom is so strict." I silently withdrew my foot that had been entering the classroom, and sure enough, the next second, Sylvie's voice, still childlike but tinged with contempt, came out. The other children circled Sylvie, gasping in awe of his amazing mother. I watched from the back door as Sylvie proudly displayed his mother without any emotion. He wasn't entirely incorrect, but his remarks were a little harsh because I started my only job has been to live with Ethan and take care of him and his son, even if the work is similar to that of a nanny. Since Ian and I are legally married, we shouldn't really be referred to as nannies. At most, we should be considered stepmothers. Sylvia is the child of Ian and the brilliant designer Aaliyah, but Aaliyah vanished shortly after giving birth, leaving them without legal status as Sylvie grew older. Ian gradually realized that the family was incomplete, so he started looking for a stepmother for Sylvie to give him a complete home. I stood out among the many candidates because I looked like Aaliyah. Sylvie knew I wasn't his mother from the first day I entered their lives, and I never intended to replace her because Ethan and I are only in a contractual marriage for 3 years, during which he had a substitute wife. On the way back, I appeared to know nothing and proceeded to take care of Sylvie as usual, asking him what he wanted for dinner. I knew my place and just took what was due since I ignored everything else. Sylvie had a stepmother, and I had $30 million. I had no reason to reject because I truly needed the money. With a glum expression, Sylvie reported a few dishes. I saw him covertly swallow his saliva and nearly burst out laughing. When we got home, Sylvie locked himself in his room. I ignored it and went straight to the kitchen to cook. After making 3 dishes and a soup, I went to call him for dinner, but before I could knock, I heard laughter coming from inside. Sylvie was on a video call, and since it was on speakerphone, I could clearly hear both a woman's voice and Ian's voice. The woman called Sylvie baby, and Sylvie called her mother. To be honest, I've gotten pretty good at cooking. I thought the necklace was another one of Ethan's purchases to plate him, as had happened before, but Aaliyah wasn't around these years, so Ethan had carefully maintained his relationship with her in the hopes that if she returned one day, she could easily come back to Sylvie. It appears now that the necklace was actually designed by Aaliyah, and after 6 years, Ethan finally found her today. The so-called business trip was actually a romantic journey of love. I sat back at the dining table and played with my phone quietly so as not to disturb their family time. Only after Sylvie hung up did I knock on his door to invite him to dinner, and after dinner I began cleaning up while Sylvie stayed at the table, looking as though he wanted to say something but didn't. Sylvie's appearance is almost exactly like Ian's, dignified and handsome, but his eyes are even prettier, probably because they are so pure that they resemble the eyes I remember, but are still not quite the same. I leaned on the table and smiled, asking him if there was anything he wanted to tell Auntie. In the evening, I wrapped myself in a blanket on the living room sofa and sobbed while watching a movie. Ian came back, finding me with my face swollen from crying. He seemed surprised and I felt embarrassed, so I quickly got up, my voice still nasal from crying. He walked up to me, his gaze calm and gentle, and his tone softened. "Why are you still up so late?" I pointed to the TV and said, "Watching a movie." He looked at me for a while as if sighing, then reached out to touch my head before I could respond. When Dodge's phone called and Aaliyah appeared on the caller ID, he went to the balcony to answer it. I slipped casually to the kitchen and said, "Ian, let's get the divorce done next week. Aaliyah is back and the contract is about to expire." Since I was no longer required as a substitute, I assumed Ian would agree right away, but his face abruptly became icy. "You want a divorce so quickly? I'm not free next week," he said, and then he ignored me and went straight to SYLV's room. I stood there perplexed because our arrangement is more like an employment relationship. He pays and I do the tasks, so why should we end the contract happily now that it's ending and he's found his true love? On Monday morning, Ethan handed me a small box, saying it was just a small trinket he picked up at an auction. I was in a rush to get Sylvie to school, so I accepted it casually and put it in my bag as usual. I brought some homemade cookies to the kindergarten, and the children gathered around me, saying, "Thank you, Auntie." When I got to the hospital, Leilani was practicing dance by the window. She smiled when she saw me and asked, "What delicious thing do you have today?" I shook the thermos in my hand and replied, "Your favorite preserved egg and pork congee." We each had a bowl and ate by the bed. I pulled out my phone, showed her some pictures, and said, "This is our other home. It's already been cleaned up." Sylvie watched me quietly for a moment before avoiding the other kids and entering school. Leilani glanced at the pictures and nodded without saying anything. I held my bowl upside down and peered out the window, where the sky was a rich blue color with fluffy clouds moving gently. I spoke quietly as the wind and the willow branches swayed. "Without you and Calvin, Leilani, there's no need to discuss being a burden." I went to pick up Sylvie from school in the afternoon, but the teacher informed me that Sylvie had been picked up in the morning, saying that Sylvie had left with his parents. After getting back to the car, I considered my options and decided that I should call Ethan to make sure, even though it was probably him and Aaliyah who picked up Sylvie. We're family, and we've been for 10 years. I was about to call when I saw Ethan's WeChat profile picture in my moments with an unread notification. I checked it and saw that it had been posted 5 minutes ago. It was a collection of pictures, with the main one showing the three of them in a happy family photo. The background was a beach, and for the first time in 3 years, Sylvie looked genuinely happy. Ethan also wore brightly colored clothes for the first time, standing next to Aaliyah and looking softer and less serious. These moments confirmed that I didn't need to call during the days when Ian and his son weren't around, so I took a short break cooking meals and taking them to the hospital to eat with Leilani before unwinding and walking around. Late at night, Ian called me. I had already gone to sleep when the phone rang, and SYLV's sobbing and Ethan's voice sounded exhausted. "Please come to the children's hospital, Camila." Ethan reported that Sylvie had been having trouble sleeping and had a high fever following the sea breeze. He was now there, but he was crying and uncooperative. I looked at the dark sky outside before getting up to pack my belongings. When I first got to the Liu family's residence, SYLV's sleep quality had always been bad. He would frequently wake up. Things had significantly improved over the previous 2 years, but he still had a strong attachment to his own bed. If I had to stay overnight somewhere, I would always bring his favorite pillow, bed linens, and pajamas. Otherwise, he wouldn't sleep well. When Sylvie traveled with his grandparents, I would always prepare everything ahead of time because I had always been in charge of this. Ethan wasn't aware of it, but as I approached the ward, I heard SYLV's cries, his voice hoarse from crying. I assumed Aaliyah would be there as well, but to my surprise, the ward contained only Ethan and Sylvie. When Ian saw me, he appeared relieved. "You're present." Sylvie was lying on the bed, and I wasn't sure if it was from sobbing or the fever, so I called Ethan to come get him. I immediately changed the bed linens and put on Sylvie's pajamas. I rocked him to sleep while holding Sylvie in my arms. As he calmed down, he curled up in my arms and held my clothes in his tiny hand while calling to me. After all the chaos, Sylvie finally fell into a stable sleep. The nurse gave him an injection, and Ian and I sat on the sofa to rest. Ian poured me a glass of water and rubbed his forehead, saying, "I'm sorry for disturbing your rest." I shook my head. "It's okay. This is my job." I touched his burning face, and yes, the fever had made him disoriented. I wasn't his mother, just his nanny. After giving me a brief glance, Ian inquired if I had opened the little box I had given you the other day or if it was something essential. I got it out of my bag on the other side of the sofa, opened it, and discovered a diamond ring inside. Ethan then abruptly covered my hand. I don't know what transpired between Ian and Aaliyah that made him willing to leave someone he had waited 6 years for and propose to me, but Camila doesn't get divorced, okay? However, I am quite clear that it is not because he loves me that much. Ian is a very disciplined and prudent person, and every decision he makes is the consequence of a careful consideration of all available options. I also have no intention of looking into the reasons behind this, because I don't like to waste mental energy on unimportant things. After removing my hand from his palm, I set the ring down on the coffee table. We are just contractual spouses, and now that the contract is coming to an end, it's time for us to finish. Ethan sat next to me, acting as though he didn't hear me, and instead explained to Camila that if it's because of Aaliyah, you can be sure that I've ended things with her. This trip was simply because she wanted to see Sylvie, and we won't be in touch anymore. Having you around these years has been comforting, and Sylvie depends on you a lot. Can't we just keep living this way? I looked at Ian calmly, saying, no, I don't know or care about what's going on with you and Aaliyah, but we cannot. I agreed to be Ian's contractual wife in order to assist Leilani with her treatment, and now that Leilani is well, we have our own lives to live, and we will settle somewhere with Wind. My direct response appeared to surprise Ian, and there was a glimmer of hurt in his eyes. Do you really have no feelings for me at all, Camila? I smiled a little, but I did mean it when I said that I was grateful to a kind employer. Without the $30 million he gave, Leilani and I would have been lost long ago, so for the past 3 years, I gave him and his son my whole attention. I was practically always available for anything involving them, but that was all I could do. I believe I was clear, but Ethan didn't seem to understand. You don't need to respond right away. I'm not in a rush. It's late. I'll have the driver take you home so you can relax. I can take care of things here. Sylvie had to spend a few days in the hospital due to a slight case of pneumonia brought on by her protracted fever. While Aaliyah hadn't paid me a single visit, Ethan had moved his work to the hospital room and stayed with Sylvie. I made meals at home and took them to the hospital one day, and as I was feeding Sylvie, I got a call from the hospital informing me that Leilani had suffered a sudden brain hemorrhage and was in critical condition. When I lost control of the bowl, it broke and landed on the ground, shocking everyone. When Sylvie happened to be entering from the outside, he approached me right away and inquired about what had happened. My hands were trembling wildly, my head was blank, and I was having trouble breathing. How could this have happened? When I saw her yesterday, she was doing well, and tomorrow was her scheduled discharge date. How could this have happened? With nearly all of my might, I gripped Ethan's sleeve and said, "Take me to the People's Hospital." Tears were streaming uncontrollably. I needed to mentally prepare myself outside, so Ian helped me by calling 2 nurses to watch over Sylvie and his parents to come over. He drove us as quickly as he could to the hospital, where the doctor informed me that Leilani had fallen while walking in the garden and that the location of the brain hemorrhage was very unfortunate. After 8 hours of emergency treatment, thunder rumbled and heavy rain started. The rainfall removed the remaining heat and made the environment more humid. Leilani died. On the day of Leilani's cremation, the 2 beams of light that had appeared in my life gradually dimmed and went out one after the other. I calmly handled all of her affairs, and occasionally I heard people by the roadside comment that the sky, which had been gloomy for so long, was finally clearing up and that it was a good day. I stared up at the sun, feeling strangely that such a blazing warm sun was unable to warm me at all. I didn't know how long I stood there, but my feet seemed glued to the ground. Everyone passing by had their own destinations, and I had none once I didn't know where I came from, and now I had none. When we got home, I napped and had many dreams that were vague and unclear. The room was dark, with only a beam of light coming from the door, and I was sitting by my bed when I reached out to check my forehead. He was backlit, and I involuntarily reached up to touch his eyes. He grasped my hand, and his voice was steady and calm. Do I look like him instantly? I tried to move my hand away as I woke up, but he grabbed on more tightly. I can do everything Colleen could do for you, Camila. That name has been with me for 10 years, and every time I hear it, it makes me cry. He pulled me out of the abyss, but he left me too soon, like fireworks briefly lighting up the night sky before disappearing. Where should I begin? Calvin, to me, he was a brother, a relative, and also a lover. Before I was 13, I was relatively fortunate. Though the old orphanage was lacking in resources and conditions, at least my safety was guaranteed. After 13, with the reform of the orphanage, conditions improved somewhat with meat to eat and books to read, but I always felt uneasy. No matter where I went, there seemed to be a pair of eyes watching me from the shadows. Drawing underwear would go missing, things in the room would disappear, and sometimes at night someone would touch my legs while I slept. I didn't dare to speak up because the person was the director. I endured for 2 years until the day the director called me into his office and tried to pull down my pants. I kicked him and ran out with all my strength, shouting for help. The orphanage was in a remote location with few pedestrians. Occasionally a few would pass by, but the director told them I was his daughter throwing a tantrum and not obeying. No one paid any attention to me. As the director got closer, a water bottle flew past my ear, and I heard the director cry out in pain. I didn't dare look back, fearing I would be caught if I was a moment too slow. I looked at the boy who had thrown the bottle. He cheerfully told me to run faster and asked if I wanted to go with him. With no other options, I kept shouting for help. He took my hand and ran with me onto a bus, and just as the director caught up, the bus started moving. The nightmare was left behind. He bought me a ticket and led me to the last seat on the bus, where a girl about my age was sitting. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the boy behind me. Brother, why did you bring back a tail from the bathroom? Later I learned that they were siblings because of long-term abuse by their father. He had stolen his father's money and run away with his sister. We didn't know where the bus was going, but the boy remained cheerful, his eyebrows raised. This bus is heading to a bright future. When we were still strangers, he told me that I would also have a bright future. On the first night in the new city, the three of us squeezed into a shabby guest house, taking turns to eat a bowl of instant noodles. I ate the noodles with his sister while he only had the soup. On the first night, lying side by side in bed, none of us could sleep. Excitement, confusion, and fear. We had escaped from the abyss, but we were unsure if the future would still be an abyss. The next day, Calvin went out and came back to tell us he had rented a house. He had saved a bit of money and stolen a little more from his father on the day he escaped. Though it wasn't much, the rented house was a small one-bedroom apartment in an old district, but it was our home in this unfamiliar city. After settling in, the three of us began to take odd jobs. Because of our age, we couldn't find regular work, so we handed out flyers, served plates, and did various odd jobs. We worked hard together, and even though we weren't wealthy, we always had enough to eat. Kelvin was 2 years older than Leilani and me, but he was still a year away from adulthood. He seemed to know how to do everything, including cooking, laundry, and taking care of us. He was quick-witted and had a sweet tongue, and he did a good job selling things at the supermarket. The supermarket also frequently gave him some vegetables. When Calvin came home one day with a piece of meat and said he had good news for us, he said he had met a teacher while working at the supermarket who was willing to help us continue our education. We all declined. Leilani struggled with poor grades and had little interest in studying from a young age. More recently, she started working as a makeup apprentice at a beauty salon, which she finds very interesting. I was too embarrassed to say otherwise, but eventually, Leilani and her brother persuaded me to continue my education. Leilani stated that I appeared to be a good fit for university and urged me to put in a lot of effort, saying that I would pay them back later. However, I understood that they genuinely considered me as family and didn't demand anything in return. Since Leilani and I shared a room, sometimes the world seemed so big with only a few people you can meet in your lifetime, and other times it seemed so small that even the smallest connections can make strangers into family. As a result, they would work outside while I went to school occasionally after class, and on the weekends I would find some part-time work, usually light jobs like helping in a store for $30 a day, which allowed me to read while working and quietly save money. When I had enough, the first thing I did was buy Calvin a folding bed. Being tall, Calvin's legs would never fit comfortably on the small sofa in the living room, so he couldn't bring himself to buy a bed for himself. However, he would buy my study materials without hesitation, and on the day the bed arrived, Calvin ruffled my hair and grinned, his eyes crinkling with happiness. You know, buying a bed for your brother was worth the trouble. When I looked at him, my heart was racing with both happiness and conflict. Later, on many late nights, I would sit at the desk studying while Calvin lay half reclining on the folding bed doing his accounts. He always noticed when my water cup was empty and would refill it for me. He would also make me a bowl of noodles and a fried egg. When I continued to study late into the night, he always looked at me with a smile and said, "I will achieve great things in the future." I once asked him why he took me with him, and he initially said that he thought I had been kidnapped because I didn't look like the director's daughter. Many people heard my pleas for help, but only he reached out to me. As I entered my senior year, the academic pressure increased, and evening study sessions ended later, and winter was especially harsh with early darkness and biting cold. Leilani explained that sitting still made me cold the fastest, so she got me the thickest snow boots and packed hand warmers in my backpack every day. Every day, Calvin would wait for me at the school gate with 2 eggs and a bottle of hot milk, explaining that I needed to refuel since I was overworking my brain. People at school got to know Calvin because he was attractive, articulate, and liked by everyone, especially the girls. Many people asked me to give him gifts and love letters, many of which ended with, "Please give this to your brother." I told them all that he wasn't interested in dating. On Christmas, Calvin waited for me at the school gate as usual. I noticed a girl blushing as she gave him an apple, and he accepted it as well as taking a baked sweet potato out of his pocket and giving it to her. I ignored him the entire time, and at the end he grabbed my backpack and pulled me back, frowning. "Were you both infuriated?" I pointed at the apple in his hand and said, "You can accept other people's apples, but I can't date early." He was momentarily stunned, then laughed, his light-colored eyes sparkling, his tone soft and almost enticing. "I see you've grown bold, huh?" He blocked my way, looking serious. "Camila, are you envious of your brother?" I felt shy and tried to flee when I realized how exposed I was in front of him, but he pulled me into his arms despite my clothes, and I could feel the vibrations of his chest. "I only accepted it because she said you were a classmate, so didn't I repay him? I just hope you get along with your friends. If Camila isn't happy, I won't accept anything the next time." A subtle change occurred in my relationship with Calvin that day, but I couldn't identify what felt wrong. We frequently looked at each other and then quickly looked away, and occasionally our hands would touch and retract as if shocked. The small details from the past seemed magnified 1,000-fold, but neither of us brought it up. One night, as I was drying my hair, Leilani asked me what was wrong. "Camila, do you have a relationship with my brother? If not, what makes him the day of the college entrance exam, which was also my birthday?" Leilani was on a business trip, so blowing out the candles and making a wish was done over a video call. She mysteriously said she had prepared a gift for me on the nightstand at the moment I blew out the candles. "I always have such a red face when he sees you. Is it that obvious?" Leilani sighed with relief before I could respond. "If my colleagues ever make a move on my brother again, I'll say I have a sister-in-law." I was a little amused and confused, not sure if I was regarded as a sister-in-law. With his head resting on his palm, Calvin gazed at me and said, "May you have peace and safety every year, Camila." At that moment, I thought that my wish should be quite easy to fulfill. I want to celebrate every birthday with Calvin and Leilani for my 18th birthday cake. The summer was hot, and the old fan made annoying noises in the dark night. I tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep, and finally crept out of my room in the dark and into Calvin's arms in the small single-folding bed. We were very close. After taking a shower and going back to my room, I found the gift Leilani had mentioned feeling quite hot in my hand, especially since Calvin was standing at the door. We exchanged a look, our faces turning, and he closed my door and told me to go to bed. I nodded as Calvin asked me which university I wanted to attend. I had already chosen a nearby normal university that offered free tuition and was close to home, but he tilted my face and said, "With your grades, you can definitely get into a better university." Calvin stiffened for a moment and then pulled me into his embrace because I couldn't sleep. Calvin pulled away, looking mildly amused. "Don't worry about the money, just concentrate on your studies. I'll take care of the rest." He couldn't say anything more because I covered his mouth at times. He could be quite nagging. I was so nervous that I forgot to breathe and almost suffocated myself during our first kiss. Here's something. After a lengthy moment of stillness during which my brilliant red face was obscured by the darkness, he patted my head. You're amazing, Camila. You ought to travel more and meet more wonderful people. He always put all of his effort into helping me in the hopes that I would attain the bright future he envisioned, so I firmly shook my head and gripped his waist. Don't constrain yourself and don't worry about us. I don't want you to regret later that you gave up something so precious. Nothing is more important than you guys, so I'm staying put. When Leilani returned and heard my thoughts, she looked at us in shock and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why can't we go to school together? Is there only one city?" Both Calvin and I were so awkward that we couldn't speak at all. Eventually, I enrolled in a university up north, and we left for a new city. We didn't have any attachment to the house where we had lived for 4 years, because we knew that any place could be home as long as the three of us were together. While I was studying and working a few part-time jobs in my spare time, Calvin and Leilani were employed. Leilani rose to some level of fame as a makeup artist and occasionally applied cosmetics for celebrities. I take autographed pictures to school and sell them for extra cash. As for me, I got scholarships every semester and life got better every day. We made a promise that once we had enough money, we would move to a place with a breeze, plant a whole garden of flowers, and get 2 cats. We were all making big steps towards that bright future, but life, as it often does, loves to throw a wrench in your plans when you're feeling good. In the second semester of my sophomore year, Colleen was diagnosed with a genetic disease. It was a rare condition that had no known medical name yet, but it could quickly destroy a person's body, and the cost of treating it was high. Even while people can't anticipate the future, they can have a good feel of certain things. Leilani started taking on work feverishly, and I withdrew from school, refusing to return no matter how much Calvin reprimanded me. Calvin grew thinner every day, gradually losing his sense of taste and eating less and less. I found a job in a kitchen, learning new recipes and trying to make dishes he might eat in the hopes that he would eat a little more. In his final days, Calvin didn't let me work and instead had me sit with him mostly in silence while he watched me. He was thin and pale, but his eyes remained clear and bright just as they were when we first met on a sunny afternoon. I knew that if I didn't stay by his side now, I would never have another chance like this. I had to increase my workload, sometimes working 5 jobs a day in order to keep him with me a little longer. After Calvin's death, Leilani and I were silent every day. The home felt empty without him, and there were no more busy people in the kitchen or the constant nagging in my ears. 20 years of carefully nurtured existence were destroyed by disease in just 6 months. Existence is so delicate. I recalled countless times, but the only thing I remembered vividly was Calvin's always smiling face and his clear eyes always full of boundless confidence in life. I held on to these memories to get through each day. Without him, another 6 months passed, and Leilani and I were gradually trying to move on from the pain. Just when I was believed to still have Leilani, she tearfully told me that she had the same disease as Calvin. At that moment, I was unexpectedly calm. I thought, if Leilani also goes, then Camila is done for. We would go to the underworld and be a family there. I couldn't live alone, but fate gave me a chance. A month after Leilani was hospitalized, Ian found me. He was very clear that I just needed to be his contract wife, mainly to take care of his son for 3 years, and he would give me $30 million. It felt like I had grabbed a lifeline, and I agreed immediately. At that moment, I realized how much I wanted to keep Leilani. I couldn't bear to see her wither like Calvin. I would do anything to save her. After marrying Ian, many people openly and secretly mocked me, saying I was just a stand-in. I learned that I resembled Ethan's most beloved woman. I didn't mind, even felt relieved. If I didn't look like her, he wouldn't have chosen me. When Leilani finally learned that I had kept the marriage a secret, she fell 3 times from crying and told me not to worry about her or allow her bring me down. I hugged her shaking body and wept with her. After 3 years of enduring innumerable nights of uncertainty and trying numerous domestic and international treatments, Leilani's condition was finally under control. The doctor said she would only need to take medication regularly and have periodic checkups. Everything seemed to be on the verge of dawn, but then I fell into even deeper darkness. I've already lost Calvin, and I can't lose you either. At that moment, we cried together, two broken souls clinging to each other in this world. I woke up at the hospital after having a fever for 3 days. Ethan informed me that the fever was too bad and that even with medication, it wouldn't go away, so he had to take me there right once. I nodded and thanked him in private, but we both implicitly avoided talking about what had happened. Sitting alongside the bed at night, I looked at Sylvie when he arrived, and he asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes, I'm sorry for scaring you that day," and he shook his head while standing next to me in silence. After a while, he took my hand and started crying. "Can you only be for me from now on?" he asked. "You always bring cookies for the classmates because they want you to be their mom, but I just want you to be my mom. Auntie have to travel far away and can't be your mum anymore, so if you miss Andy, you can ask Dad." To Sylvie bit his lip as his stunning eyes welled up with unrelenting tears before whispering, "I get it." I didn't want to stay in the city after Leilani died, but in the afternoon, Ian returned and asked if I could stay for an additional 6 months since Sylvie needed me. I emailed him a detailed list that included SYLV's daily routines and habits, but I shook my head, acknowledging that separation is unavoidable. There shouldn't be any issues if the person caring for him afterwards simply follows this list. Let's get a divorce, Ethan. I want to see Calvin because I haven't seen him in a long time. 3 years have passed since I agreed to be Ethan's contract wife, and I put Calvin's ashes in a temple. I haven't dared to go inside the temple for the past 3 years because I'm married now, and I'm sure that every time I missed him, he would be sad. I went inside and silently took out a divorce agreement, signed it, and said, "I'm sorry for mistaking you that night." He looked at me with the same composed manner as that night, and I shook my head. At first glance, I thought your eyes were somewhat similar, but upon closer inspection, they aren't, Ethan. I've never sought his shadow in you because you're not him, and no one else can be him. My Calvin had the purest eyes in the world and a heart full of love for life. He was always one of a kind. He was like the moon among clouds, gleaming brightly like the stars in the sky. Aaliyah called me the night before we left and asked to meet. It was the first time I had ever seen her in person, and she was even more stunning than in the pictures. She was flamboyant and striking, and I honestly didn't understand why everyone thought we looked alike. She seemed to share this sentiment, as her first words to me were, "Who's so blind to say you're my replacement?" She looked at me for a long time before saying, "What a pity, actually based on personality you and Ian are quite compatible as you have the same stubborn nature as I do, always clashing after so many years of ups and downs we've worn each other out." I thought she was going to talk about Ian, but she honestly admitted that I was only his contract wife and that we had already divorced. She smiled and said, "I know I came today just to see you. I come today mostly to express my gratitude because I am a self-centered individual who is constantly pursuing my own wide ocean and is reluctant to be constrained by family and kids. I regret Sylvie and acknowledge that I have been a bad mother, but you have taken excellent care of him over the years. When I last saw him, he was well-behaved and understanding, stating that you frequently taught him and treated him well. I'm happy and grateful for this small token of my gratitude for your care." The day I arrived in Yunnan, the weather was bright and breezy with the scent of flowers carried by the wind. I settled Calvin and Leilani and started organizing things. The courtyard had already been cleaned and was very tidy. I just needed to dust a little and put things in a neat arrangement while going through Leilani's belongings. Ethan is his father's part, and this is my part as his mother. Please accept it for a job I received double the pay, feeling a little uneasy. Suddenly, a letter appeared in Leilani's handwriting, which she had planned to give to me on the day of departure. The envelope, which had a cartoon smiley face on it, begged me to wait until she was on the plane before reading it. As I opened the mail, my eyes filled with tears. "Sweet Camila, I will have already left for Yen, our third home, by the time you read this message. Our fate is genuinely enigmatic. I'm not sure why I'm writing this letter, but I hope you understand that life always moves forward and that my brother wouldn't want you to be stuck in the past. He hopes you find true happiness, and in his final days, he quietly told me that he hoped you would marry someone who truly loves you in the future. A little girl my brother casually took along ended up becoming an inseparable family member after 10 years. We have been closer than any blood relationship. Leilani held the letter, and my hands trembled. Big tears soaked the paper, but I quickly wiped them away and folded the letter carefully for safekeeping. A month later, the small courtyard was beautifully arranged, and the flowers were planted. Don't be afraid to open your heart and embrace a new life. I will always be behind you, your closest family, and I will have planted a whole garden of flowers to welcome you forever. I love you as much as Calvin did. Two kittens were peacefully enjoying the sun in a little bed on the porch while I was lying in a rocking rocker when I got a call from an unknown number asking if I would be interested in publishing my writings. The posts were mostly from my high school days, documenting my everyday life whenever I was exhausted from studying. This practice persisted until Calvin became ill, at which point I lost interest and stopped posting. After giving it some thought, I decided to log into the long-neglected account and start going over our interactions and everyday moments from the beginning. Recollections from so long ago can occasionally be hazy, but as I read through the posts, I realized how vibrant and colorful I didn't excel academically from the beginning either. When I returned to school, I struggled to keep up during the first monthly exam, scoring only 16 in maths. I hid the test paper in my backpack, but Calvin found it and laughed at me for 6 months. I scrolled through the posts laughing so hard I almost cried. It was a long time, but we have countless warm memories. Calvin wasn't a skilled cook from the beginning, much like me, even nearly burning down the kitchen once and Leilani had to douse. I picked up the pen once more and made the decision to finish writing the story from the first encounter to the conclusion. We saved enough money and moved to a place where the wind blows, and each gust of wind would carry the scent of the garden flowers and drift away to the distance. At this point, I wanted to give the book a beautiful name, but after thinking for 2 or 3 days, nothing seemed quite right. Then, I came across a quote that I really liked in my old age, free and guilt-free, and I called it Passing Spring and Autumn. I sent the final draft and closed the notebook, and today was another lovely day. I opened the window and saw the flower seedlings swaying gently in the breeze, and I knew we would definitely cross paths again.